Good morning, everyone. I hope that you had a good first day of working with Google Slides to complete your assignment. Yesterday, we finished chapter 10 called The Colorful Symphony. And indeed, the chapter ended with a colorful symphony. In fact, in this fantastic world, the world is colored by music. And I asked you to share your ideas on what the music of a sunset was to you with your trusted adult. I know that when I imagine the music of a sunset, I can hear like a soft, gentle classical music with all the pianos and it just something nice sounding. Another way that we could have thought about this chapter, A Colorful Symphony, is the idea that music colors the world. You might be able to think about how music actually makes the world a more beautiful place to live. I think I'm noticing a theme of like the importance of appreciating all the beauty in the world around us because at the beginning of the story, remember, Milo was always bored and he never felt like he cared about anything. But now Milo's really interested in what's going on around him, and it's just making him think about all the things that he didn't really notice and appreciate about his own normal world before he came in past the Phantom Tollbooth. I think that perhaps the author, Norton Juster, wants his readers to notice all the amazing things that are in our lives, like the taste of words, and how amazing it is that we grow up to see things from an ever changing perspective. Maybe to slow down. Maybe to slow down and notice our streets and home and enjoy the color of a sunset and to enjoy music more. Let's see what Milo discovers today as he adventures past the Phantom Tollbooth. So you'll remember he fell asleep on the pages of the music book. Number 11, Discord and Din. One by one, the hours passed, and at exactly 5:22 by Talk's very, very accurate clock, Milo carefully opened one eye and in a moment the other. Everything was still purple, dark blue, and black, yet scarcely a minute remained to the long, quiet night. He stretched lazily, rubbed his eyes, scratched his head, and shivered once as a greeting to the early morning mist. I must wake Chroma for the sunrise, he said softly. Then he suddenly wondered what it would be like to lead the orchestra and to color the whole world himself. The idea whirled through his thoughts until he quickly decided that since it couldn't be very difficult, and since they probably all knew what to do just by themselves anyways, and since it did seem a shame to wake anyone so early, and since it might be his only chance to try, and since the musicians were already poised and ready, he would, but just for a little while. And so, as everyone slept peacefully on, Milo stood on tiptoe, raised his arm slowly in front of him, and made the slightest movement possible with the index finger of his right hand. It was now 5:23 a.m. As if understanding his signal perfectly, a single piccolo played a single note, and off in the east a solitary shaft of cool lemon light flicked across the sky. Milo smiled happily and then cautiously crooked his finger again. This time 2 more piccolos and a flute joined in, and 3 more rays of light danced lightly into view. Then, with both hands, he made a great circular sweep in the air and watched with delight as all the musicians began to play at once. The cellos made the hills glow red, and the leaves and the grass were tipped with a soft pale green as the violins began their song. Only the bass fiddles rested in as the entire orchestra washed the forest in color. Milo was overjoyed because they were all playing for him, and just the way they should. Won't Chroma be surprised, he thought, signaling the musicians to stop. I'll wake him now. But instead of stopping, they continued to play even louder than before until each color became more brilliant than he thought possible. Milo shielded his eyes with one hand and waved the other desperately, but the colors continued to grow brighter and brighter and brighter until an even more curious thing began to happen. As Milo frantically conducted, the sky changed slowly from blue to tan and then to a rich magenta red. Flurries of light green snow began to fall, and the leaves on the trees and the bushes turned a vivid orange. All the flowers suddenly appeared black, the gray rocks became a lovely soft cerise, and even peacefully sleeping Talk changed from brown to a magnificent ultramarine. Nothing was the color it should have been, and yet, the more he tried to straighten things out, the worse they became. I wish I hadn't started, he thought unhappily as a pale blue blackbird flew by. There doesn't seem to be any way to stop them. He tried very hard to do everything just the way Chroma had done, but nothing worked. The musicians played on faster and faster, and the purple sun raced quickly across the sky. In less than a minute, it had set once more in the west, and then, without any pause, risen again in the east. The sky was now quite yellow, and the grass was a charming shade of lavender. 7 times the sun rose and almost as quickly disappeared as the colors kept changing. In just a few minutes, a whole week had gone by. At last, the exhausted Milo, afraid to call for help and on the verge of tears, dropped his hands to his sides. The orchestra stopped, the colors disappeared, and once again it was night. The time was 5:27 a.m. "Wake up, everybody! Time for the sunrise!" he shouted with relief and quickly jumped from the music stand. "What a marvelous rest," said Chroma, striding to the podium. "I feel as though I slept for a week. My, I see we're a little late this morning. I'll have to cut my lunch hour short by 4 minutes." He tapped for attention, and this time the dawn proceeded perfectly. "You did a fine job," he said, patting Milo on the head. "Some day I'll let you conduct the orchestra yourself." Talk wagged his tail proudly, but Milo didn't say a word. And to this day, no one knows of the lost week but the few people who happened to be awake at 5:23 on that very strange morning. "We'd better be getting along," said Talk, whose alarm had begun to ring, "for there's still a long way to go." Chroma nodded a fond goodbye as they all started back through the forest, and in honor of the visit he made all the wild flowers bloom in a breathtaking display. "I'm sorry that you can't stay longer," said Alex Ellie. "There's so much more to see in the forest to sight. But I suppose there's a lot to see everywhere, if you only keep your eyes open." They walked for a while, all silent in their thoughts, until they reached the car, and Alec drew a fine telescope from his shirt and handed it to Milo. "Carry this with you on your journey," he said softly, "for there is much worth noticing that often escapes the eye. Through it you can see everything from the tender moss in the sidewalk crack to the glow of the furthest star. And most important of all, you can see things as they really are, not just as they seem to be. It's my gift to you." Milo placed the telescope carefully in the glove compartment and reached up to shake Alec by the hand. Then he stepped on the starter and, with his head full of strange new thoughts, drove out the far end of the forest. The easy rolling countryside now stretched before them in the series of dips and rises that leapt up one side of each crest and slid gently down the other in a way that made stomachs laugh and faces frown. As they topped the brow of the highest hill, a deep valley appeared ahead. The road, finally making up its mind, plummeted down, as if anxious to renew acquaintances with the sparkling blue stream that flowed below. When they reached the floor of the valley, the wind grew stronger as it funneled through the rocks, and directly ahead, a bright colored speck grew larger and larger. "It looks like a wagon!" cried Milo excitedly. "It is a wagon. A carnival wagon," seconded Talk. And that's exactly what it was. Parked at the side of the road, painted bright red, and looking quite deserted, on the side, in enormous white letters bordered in black, was the inscription, Canophasis, Cacophonous, a discord. And below, in slightly smaller black letters bordered in white, was Doctor of Dissonance. "Perhaps if someone's at home, he might tell us how far we have to go," said Milo, parking next to the wagon. He tiptoed timidly up the 3 wooden steps to the door, tapped lightly, and leapt back in fright. For the moment he knocked, there was a terrible crash from inside the wagon that sounded as if the whole set of dishes had been dropped from the ceiling onto a hard stone floor. At the same time, the door flew open, and from the dark interior, a hoarse voice inquired, "Have you ever heard a whole set of dishes drop from the ceiling onto a hard stone floor?" Milo, who had tumbled back off the steps, sat up quickly, while Talk and the humbug rushed from the car to see what had happened. "Well, have you?" insisted the voice, which was so raspy that it made you want to clear your own throat. "Not until just now," replied Milo, getting to his feet. "Ha, I thought not," said the voice happily. "Have you ever heard an ant wearing fur slippers walk across a thick wool carpet?" And before they could answer, he went on in a strange croaking way. "Well, don't just stand there in the cold. Come in, come in. It's lucky you happened by. None of you looks well." The faint glow of the ceiling lamp dimly illuminated the wagon as they cautiously stepped inside. Talk first, eager to defend against all dangers. Milo next, frightened but curious, and the humbug last, ready at any moment to run for his life. "Oh, that's right. Now let's have a look at you," he said. Very bad. Serious case." The dusty wagon was lined with shelves of curious boxes and jars of a kind found in old apothecary shops. It looked as though it had been swept out in years. Bits and pieces of equipment lay strewn all over the floor, and the rear was a heavy wooden table covered with books, bottles, and bric-a-brac. "Have you ever heard a blindfolded octopus unwrap a cellophane-covered bathtub?" he inquired again, as the air was filled with a loud, crinkling, snapping sound. Sitting at the table, busily mixing and measuring, was a man who invited them in. He was wearing a long white coat with a stethoscope around his neck and a small round mirror attached to his forehead. And the only really noticeable things about him were his tiny mustache and his enormous ears, each of which was fully as large as his head. "Are you a doctor?" asked Milo, trying to feel as well as possible. "I am Cacophonous, a discord, Doctor of Dissonance," roared the man, and as he spoke, several small explosions and a grinding crash were heard. "What does the A stand for?" stammered the nervous bug, too frightened to move. "As loud as possible," bellowed the doctor, and 2 screeches and a bump accompanied his response. "Now, step a little closer and stick out your tongues." "Just as I suspected," he continued, opening a large dusty book and thumping the pages. "You're suffering from a severe lack of noise." He began to jump around the wagon, snatching bottles from the shelves until he had a large assortment in various colors and sizes collected at one end of the table. All were neatly labeled: loud cries, soft cries, bangs, bongs, smashes, crashes, swishes, swooshes, snaps and crackles, whistles and gongs, squeaks, squawks, and miscellaneous uproar. After pouring a little of each into a large glass beaker, he stirred the mixture thoroughly with a wind spoon. Watch intently as it smoked and steamed and boiled and bubbled. "Be ready in just a moment," he explained, rubbing his hands. Milo had never seen such an unpleasant-looking medicine and wasn't at all anxious to try any. Just what kind of doctor are you? He asked suspiciously. Well, you might say that I'm a specialist, said the doctor. I specialize all kinds, from the loudest to the softest, and from the slightly annoying to the terribly unpleasant. For instance, have you ever heard a square-wheeled steamroller ride over a street full of hard-boiled eggs? He asked, and as he did, all that could be heard were loud, crunching sounds. But who would want to hear all those terrible noises? Asked Milo, holding his ears. Everybody does, said the surprised doctor. They're very popular today. Well, I'm kept so busy that I can hardly fill out orders for noise pills, racket lush, and clamor solve, and hubbub tonic. That's all people seem to want these days. He stirred the beaker of liquid a few more times, and then the steam cleared, and continued. Business wasn't always so good. Years ago, everyone wanted pleasant sounds, and except for a few orders during wars and earthquakes, things were very bad. But then the big cities were built, and there was a great need for honking horns, screeching trains, clanging bells, deafening shouts, piercing shrieks, gurgling drains, and all the rest of those wonderfully unpleasant sounds we use so much of today. Without them, people would be very unhappy, so I make sure they get as much as they want. Why, if you take a little of my medicine every day, you'll never have to hear a beautiful sound again. Here, try some. Well, if it's all the same to you, I'd rather not, said the humbug, backing away to the far corner of the wagon. Oh, I don't want to be cured of beautiful sounds, insisted Milo. Besides, growled Talk, who decided he didn't much like Dr. Discord, there's no such illness as a lack of noise. Oh, of course not, replied the doctor, pouring himself a small glass of the liquid. That's what makes it so difficult to cure. I only treat illnesses that don't exist. That way, if I can't cure them, there's no harm done. Just one of the precautions of the trade, he concluded. And seeing that no one was about to take his medicine, he reached out towards the shelf to remove a dark amber bottle, dusted it carefully, and placed it on the table in front of him. Very well, if you want to go all through life suffering from a noise deficiency, I'll give it all to the din for his lunch, he said, and uncorked the bottle with a hollow popping-sounding pop. For a moment, everything was quiet as Milo, Talk, and the humbug looked intently at the bottle, wondering what Dr. Discord would do next. Then, very faintly at first, they heard a low rumbling that sounded miles away. It grew louder and louder and louder and closer and closer and closer until it became a deafening, ear-splitting roar that seemed to be coming from inside the tiny bottle. Then, from the bottle, a thick, bluish smoke spiraled to the ceiling, spread out, and gradually assumed the shape of a thick, bluish smog with hands, feet, bright yellow eyes, and a large frowning mouth. As soon as the smog had gotten completely out of the bottle, it grasped the beaker of liquid, tilted back what would have been its head if it really had one, and drank it all in 3 gulps. Ah, that was good, master, he bellowed, shaking the whole wagon. I thought you'd never let me out. Terribly cramped in there. This is my assistant, the awful Din, said Dr. Discord. You must forgive his appearance, for he doesn't really have any. You see, he is an orphan, whom I raised myself without the benefit of governess or any other assistance for. No nurse is a good nurse, interrupted the Din, doubling up with laughter, if you can imagine a thick bluish smog doubled up with laughter. For I found him, continued the doctor, ignoring this outburst, living alone and unwanted in an abandoned soda bottle, without family or relatives. No niece is a good niece, roared the Din again, and laughed that sounded like several sirens going off at once, and he slapped at where his niece should have been. And I brought him here, continued the exacerbated Discord, where despite his lack of shape or features, I trained. No nose is a good nose, thundered the Din once again, and he collapsed into another fit of hysterics and clutched his sides. I've trained him as my assistant in the business of concocting and dispensing noise, finished the doctor, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. No noise is a good noise, exclaimed the humbug, happily, trying to catch the spirit of things. That's not funny at all, sobbed the din, who went to a corner and sulked. What is a din? Asked Milo, as he recovered from the shock of seeing him appear. You mean you've never met the awful din before, said Dr. Discord in a surprised tone. Well, I thought everyone had. When you're playing in your room and making a great amount of noise, what do they tell you to stop? Oh, that awful din, admitted Milo. When the neighbors are playing their radio too loud late at night, what do you wish they'd turn down? That awful din, answered Talk. When the street on your block is being repaired and the pneumatic drills are working all day, what does everyone complain of? The dreadful row, volunteered the humbug brightly. The dreadful row, cried the anguished din, was my grandfather. He perished in the great silence epidemic of 1712. Milo felt so sorry for the unhappy din that he gave him his handkerchief, which was immediately covered in bluish smoky tears. Thank you, groaned the din. That's very kind. I certainly can't understand why you don't like noise, he said. Why, I heard an explosion last week that was so lovely I cried for 2 days. The very thought of it upset him so much that he began to sob all over again in a way that sounded almost exactly like a handful of fingernails being scratched across a mile-long blackboard. He buried his head in the doctor's lap. He's very sensitive, isn't he? Asked Milo, trying to comfort the emotional din. It's true, agreed Dr. Discord. But he's right, you know, for noise is the most valuable thing in the world. King Azaz says that words are. Nonsense! The doctor roared. Why, when a baby wants food, how does he ask? He screams, answers the din, looking up happily. And when an automobile wants gas, it chokes, he shouted again, jumping for joy. When a river wants water, what does it do? It creaks, bellowed the din, as he collapsed into a fit of uncontrollable laughter. And what happens when a new day begins? It breaks, he gasped joyfully from the floor, and a look of utter bliss covering his face. You see how simple it is, the doctor said to Milo, who didn't see at all. And then, turning to the tear-stained, smiling din, he remarked, Isn't it time for you to go? Where to? Asked Milo. Perhaps we're going the same way. I think not, the din replied, picking up an armful of empty sacks from the table. For I'm going on my noise collection rounds. You see, one day I travel throughout the kingdom and collect all the wonderfully horrible and beautifully unpleasant noises that have been made, pack them into my sacks, and bring them back here for the doctor to make his medicines room. And a good job he does, said Dr. Discord, pounding his fist on the table. So wherever the noise is, that's where you'll find me, said the din with an appreciative smile. And I must hurry along, for I understand that today's to be a screech, several loud crashes, and a bit of pandemonium. And in which direction are you going? Asked the doctor, mixing another brew. To Digilopolis, replied Milo. How unfortunate, he said as the din shuffled towards the door. How unfortunate, for you must pass through the Valley of Sound. Is that bad? Asked the perpetually worried humbug. The din paused in the doorway with a look of extreme horror on his face, his almost featureless face, and the doctor shuddered in a way that sounded very much like a fast-moving freight train being derailed into a mountain of custard. Well, you might ask, for you will find out soon enough, was all he would say as he sadly bade them a farewell, and the din galloped off on his rounds. So that's the end of that chapter. I was thinking, do you like unpleasant noises or pleasant ones? When you make a noise, is it soft or loud? Would you want to be cured of pleasant sounds? I think I like all sounds, like the soft ones and the noisy ones. I love the soft crush of shoes on sand as I wander in the desert. I like the wild calls of all the different birds, like the blackbirds and the owls and the roadrunners and the quails. I love the hum of the highway as the cars roll down it, the chatter of a family playing at the river, the mild buzz of my fish's tank filter, and there's just so many beautiful sounds and wild ones too. I think that the best sounds are probably about 7 o'clock. It's kind of when the birds are starting to wake up and the traffic's still kind of going, but things are kind of mostly quiet and you can just hear sounds so clearly. Today, with your trusted adult, I want you to close your eyes and listen. Try to hear everything, all the little noises and the big ones. Write down the list of all the sounds you've heard, and then I want you to compare your list to your trusted adults. Who heard more sounds? Did you hear sounds that they didn't? How beautiful and wonderful the world is. All right, I'll read to you tomorrow.